Chapter 11. Excuse me while I rip the sky. Repeated information owing to surprise. They went into the green? The Grell Master stared at Thu, its facial tentacles flickering with glee. They left this world by way of this transport mechanism? You could say that, yes, said the friendly alien, smiling and shaking his head vigorously. The Grell Master turned to the other Grell. Conference, it said. Stokes raised an eyebrow. He gathered that the Grell were unfamiliar with human body language, but he wondered if Thu was too. Excuse me, he whispered to the Perfecton, but when humans want to express agreement, we usually nod. I know, Thu nodded, as if to show that he could. That was an attempt at telling a lie. How did I do? Oh, fine, Stokes sighed. So, your people didn't leave this world using the green? Using... No, I said to you quite clearly that you can only go to other places using the green for a short walk. My people developed the green thinking of travel, but could not travel using it. That is why it became a toy. So they didn't go somewhere in it, like the green was a spaceship. They went to it. They may still remain there if the plan didn't work out. The plan? Epstein prompted. What plan is this? Thu made a low whistling noise, which, from the context, Stokes took to be the Perfecton equivalent of a sigh. Any of you hear of a spaceship vanishing from its course? A mystery vessel that disappeared, didn't show up where it was supposed to? Oh, there have been thousands, Wagstaff chuckled. Why, the subject has a pedigree as ancient as mankind itself. To begin with, we may examine the missing vessel legends of ancient Sumeria. Wagstaff, you old fool! He's talking about spaceships, Blandish whispered urgently. Yes, Wagstaff giggled. But the context, the nature of the tales, is exactly the same. What these two are trying to say, Singh cut in, is yes, lots. Thu here could be referring to any one of them. We were even on one such ship ourselves, sighed Stokes. What? Asked Thu. Our ship was destroyed by one of your missiles. That's going to go down in the history books as a mysterious loss, unless we get back home to talk about it. He realized that Thu was looking at him strangely. What? Have I missed something again? Your ship? A missile? After all these centuries? Was yours the first ship to come to our planet? Yes, dear, Hetty told him comfortingly. There was a blockade. Nobody was allowed near. Thu laughed again, though already Stokes had begun to recognize the signs of sadness in the being's voice. Isn't that ironic? I have been here for so many years, and my people were nearby. What do you mean? Singh hissed. Do get around to telling us before the heat death of the universe, won't you? Very well, Thu decided. Many centuries ago, Bernice's party appeared back in the Vizier's dungeons, several feet above the floor. With a shout, they fell in an awkward heap. The Vizier, his turban at an odd angle, crawled from the wreckage, and Bernice struggled free behind him. Well, what do you expect? He asked her. I didn't have time to sort out my vertical load. It'll do, Bernice told him, brushing herself down and making sure that the others were all right as they clambered to their feet. Is there any way that we can find out what that genie's doing right now? Yes, said the Vizier, trotting over to a mirror mounted on the wall. PNN, the Pantolan News Network. Watch. He waved a hand before the mirror, and a picture appeared. The genie advancing on a tiny hamlet of thatched cottages. Jolly peasants in colourful costumes ran from the buildings as the genie's eyes blazed, setting fire to the buildings. A caption read, Live from Rabbitsville. That's inside the kingdom, Moody muttered. That thing moves fast. The creature seems unstoppable, a commentator was crying out. A royal decree has gone out to all the points of the kingdom. seeking a hero, woodchopper, or boy with something puny given to him by an old woman who will save us all from this terrible threat. This genie," the commentator paused for dramatic effect, "is not here to grant us 3 wishes." Gushy pushed her way to the front of the crowd and stared at the screen. "What's it doing?" she whispered. The genie floated past the village and had paused on the horizon. It spread its arms wide, curled its fingers, and gripped the sky with its fingertips. The dwarves gawped. The sky was creasing against the pressure of the genie's hands. Then, with one mighty rip, the genie pulled the sky down. "The sky is falling," gasped Cute. Indeed it was. Bernice watched as lumps of painted backdrop fell everywhere, crushing buildings, thundering into lakes, sending shockwaves across the countryside. Where the sky had been, there was now only darkness, illuminated by vast, distant lights that were too bright to look at directly. Bernice recognized that environment. "The fourth wall has officially been broken," she announced. "I think we can expect visitors." "Visitors?" asked Gushy. "What do you mean?" From the stairs came the sound of somebody running down into the dungeons, running with great haste. It was Prince Charming. He stopped when he saw Bernice and the others, but his message was too urgent for surprise. "The audience!" he cried to the vizier. "The audience is revolting!" Bernice slapped a hand over Candy's mouth and nodded grimly to the prince. "We know." Thu was looking into the distance, as if his eyes could see back in time. The academics waited in silence. The Grell were still gurgling amongst themselves on the other side of the enclosure. Typical of them, thought Stokes, to focus on the first fact that revealed itself, and so miss the complete picture. "Many centuries ago, my people realized that at some point within the next few hundred years, our sun would become a supernova. They couldn't, for reasons I've already mentioned, leave, by spacecraft or by the green. So they developed another plan, making use of the green indirectly. They wanted, remember, a way to take the whole population of my world, and all its culture, all its worlds and art and lifestyle, away at once. They knew the green was infinite, that they could all stay there. The green isn't a world in itself, not a place to live, but it could be a shelter. So they came up with a big plan. Every member of our race was to meet together in this big hall." He gestured at the distant ceiling above. "All 3 billion of them. They marched, and this took days, with entertainment and refreshment along the way, until, group by group, they were under this central projector, a giant gateway into the green. Being the sort of race that liked parades and music and lining up, and long lived enough to worry about stuff like supernovae, they really got into it. Day after day, I watched them pass week after week, until, after about an Earth year, only the Greater One was left. The Greater One and me." "Greater One?" asked Wagstaff. "The leader of our people. He decided on this silly plan after his coup toppled our last leader, the Great One. The Great One wanted to stay, have a party, and die with our son. Maybe he was right." "Why didn't you go?" Stokes asked. "Why would you want to stay behind?" "Because I had lived far too long a time, so I thought. Because I was a rebel. I wanted to see what life was like without all of my people around me, if one of us could survive alone." Thu's blue tongue flicked out and licked the tips of his sharp teeth. "I remember the Greater One telling me that I would enjoy it for about a week. He was wrong. I enjoyed it for about a year. Then I wanted to see my friends and family and species again. I was so foolish." "Well," murmured Farouk, "if your people are in the green and these toy guns send things into the green, why didn't you just—" "Yes, I did think of that." Thu's tone verged on the angry for a moment. But if I shot myself with one, I couldn't control my path through the green. I would be lost, with no guarantee of finding them. To navigate through the green using the toys, somebody has to be outside, using a control box. I was going to ask you to shoot me. Wish I'd got round to it now. Yes, Singh nodded excitedly. That Grell who got shot didn't really seem to know where he was going. He might have ended up anywhere or anywhen. But what about the big version, up above us? He indicated the vast machinery overhead with a flick of his head. Thu lowered his gaze slowly. I was an artist, a poet. I don't know how to use it. It was the most advanced part of our technology. Even with centuries here on my hands, I couldn't learn. Stokes had been alone many times in his life, and, secretly, had never been comfortable with it. Centuries of solitude sounded like torture to him. He spoke softly. I'm very sorry. Him? The Grell Master marched across the enclosure and pointed at Stokes. Information! He will be the subject of the experiment. Experiment? Stokes squeaked. I'm the expert at anything scientific, babbled Singh. He's just an artist. You should take me instead. 2 Grell servitors released Stokes from his bonds as the Grell Master turned to his fellows. It is because he is recorded in our databanks as an artist, and thus useless, that he is a suitable experimental subject. What are you going to do to me? Asked Stokes, feeling both indignant and pleased at the same time. Indignant that art was regarded as useless by the Grell, pleased that for once it was all art that was at fault, and not his particular contribution. We are going to send you on an expedition into the green, said the Grell Master, raising the gun and the control box. You will gather data and, if you return, report. Oh. Stokes looked at the others, considering Thu's words. If the green was good enough for a whole species, it was good enough for him. Well, that's not so bad. The Grell Master's face tentacles thrashed its consternation. Information. Report may be the wrong word. Be dissected is a closer translation. Ah, said Stokes. Have I mentioned that my brain has several major structural flaws? The experiment begins now, said the Grell Master, as his servitors stepped back from Stokes. He raised the gun. Stokes looked to his left and right as the servitors stepped away for him, remembering Thu's terrifying words about being lost in the green. Suddenly he thought of a very clever plan, which was a pity, because at that moment the Grell Master fired. Menlove Stokes vanished in a burst of flame. Right! Bernice and her party strode into the king's chambers, the vizier and the prince scampering behind her. How many men do we have? King Rupert looked up from where several advisers had gathered around his table, pointing at locations on large maps. Who is this young whippersnapper? He growled, and why does he think to advise us on military policy? Bernice put a hand to her brow. She'd forgotten. If her theory was right, she was going to have to fight a war against a massive, well-armed, highly advanced army with a force consisting of 10 soldiers in cardboard armour, an Arab boy with a flying carpet, a troop of comedy outlaws, 7 dwarves, and a pantomime horse. At least they weren't all speaking in rhyme at the moment. She slapped her thigh, which always seemed to impress people, and forced a jaunty smile. Do not be fooled by my simple garb, sire. I am your long-lost son, the prince abandoned in the woods. I was saved by a kindly woodcutter, a sweet old woman, a wolf, and— Bernice tried to remember her pantomimes. A family of bears who fed me on porridge. Son! The king ran to Bernice and embraced her. You come to us at the most opportune time. A great genie has come upon us. The dwarves all looked at Candy. You're making up your own jokes, she muttered. Nobody else? Bernice asked, surprised. It's just genie grief you're having at the moment. Well, behind him there marches an army, but surely the genie is more important. The genie is just a servant of the army. Bernice glared sternly at the characters around her. And if we're going to win this battle, you're going to have to give up that habit of withholding vital tactical information if it gets in the way of a bad joke. I didn't even get to make the joke, Candy sulked. Is this army really the audience? Asked Wolsey. We think so. King Rupert lifted up one of the maps and pointed to a dark line, the path of the invading army. They come from the fabled land beyond the sky, where the big lights shine. You know about the audience. The world of pantomime continued to surprise Bernice. Yes, the vizier nodded. They loom large in our legends. They're the ones who... He looked a little disappointed. Yeah, they're not hissing me anymore. So that was where the sound was coming from. Bernice resisted the temptation to slap her thigh again. It was going to end up bruised at this rate. In our great myths, the king continued, the audience appear only infrequently. One or two of them sometimes appear to help us sing a song. We are told that, if they are angry, sweets will appease them. When this threat to our land first became apparent, I ordered an aerial bombardment of the enemy. Despite the grim nature of the threat facing them, the idea appalled Bernice. You dropped bombs on them? No, the king frowned. Licorice toffees. But if their aggression persists, I can see no option but to deploy our most terrible weapon. A hush fell over the room. Bernice folded her arms and tapped her foot. It was finally Gushy who realized that nobody else was going to say the cue line. You don't mean... Yes. The king walked to an alcove where a large shape was covered with a black cloth. He pulled the cloth away. Revealed was a shiny, black, egg-shaped object. There was a gasp from everybody present, except Bernice. The king nodded grimly. The A bonbon, the most terrifying sugared confectionery ever developed by mankind. Laddish raised his hand, looking like he was salivating over the prospect of the bomb's use. What does the A stand for? The king paused dramatically. Aniseed. Before everybody could make more horrified noises, Bernice grabbed the cloth from the king and dropped it back over the big sweet. All right. She started to tick off the possibilities on her fingers. I don't want to hear about how the scientists developing the bomb caught aniseed poisoning. I don't want to hear about the potential threat of an aniseed winter. I don't want to hear speculation about what sort of goose could drop this thing, or whether or not the enemy have developed a cruise gobstopper. There are to be no calculations of how much an ounce of aniseed would cost in a black sweet shop. And if I hear so much as a single mention of aniseed fallout, I shall scream. The assembled inhabitants of Pantoland looked at each other and said, "Aww." Bernice remained stern. In short, stop messing about, volunteered the vizier. Exactly. Now, let's get up onto the battlements and have a look at the enemy. Having a look at the enemy was frighteningly easy, as it turned out. From the topmost battlement of the topmost tower of the castle, Bernice and her friends gazed out over the kingdom and saw a huge black line on the horizon. The king raised a spyglass to his eyes and exclaimed, By all my horses and all my men, there are many, many millions of them, Bernice finished. Enough to overwhelm the entire kingdom, if that's what they want to do. She glanced at Wolsey. That's the biggest audience we'll ever see. But how can we hope to stop them? Prince Charming wrung his hands together. I should take my cavalry and... Absolutely not, said Bernice. That would be sheer folly. and considering the state of your cavalry, not even magnificent folly. No, we need to find out what's caused this to happen. Why the genie was so aggressive, what the purpose of the lamp was, why the caves where it was hidden were so very unpanto. She stopped and pointed at the vizier. You're our lamp expert. You said that you had a plinth put aside for it. Where is that exactly? Well, where do you think it is? The vizier snapped. Where else would I put a lamp? In the master bedroom that the king here has reserved for his daughter and her future husband, of course. The king was nodding along with him. Where else would you put an ancient and mysterious lamp? Bernice turned to Wolsey and the dwarves. Now, can you spot the single flaw in this argument? The master bedroom was decorated in an extraordinary style. As the vizier had mentioned, the plinth was, indeed, situated between a shelf of china cats and the picture of the crying boy. Bernice and her party approached the plinth, whilst Prince Charming looked uncomfortable. I don't know how this is going to help us win the war, he muttered. Wolsey popped a claw and idly scratched his chin with it. The prince fell silent. Bernice automatically dropped to one knee in front of the plinth. The thing was at the focus of the whole room, the kind of object that, in archaeological terms, added up to spear traps and falling weights. It was made of the same, rather battered material as the lamp. There was an indentation on its surface that was exactly the same shape of the lamp's base. It so cried out, "Put lamp here," that there ought to have been a sign to that effect. She gently rested her fingertips on the top of the plinth, estimated how much the lamp had weighed, and pressed. A moment of dislocation. Nothing. And then everything was back as it had been. Except the room was rolling, and everybody was staggering to and fro. Terrible things! Lazy was screaming. Candy was huddled in a corner, clutching her breasts. Wolsey was in a fetal position on the bed, shivering. Bernice stepped up and away from the plinth and shouted that she wasn't going to do it again, that everything was fine. She remembered a timeless time during the blankness, a little moment of fizzing haze, like she'd experienced when making those jumps between stage and audience. She went to Wolsey. He opened his eyes and was almost glaring at her with his bravery. You were correct, he hissed from clenched teeth. I am a thoughtless thing. I function as if in a dream, propelled here and there by instinct and base desire. When I return to my usual form, I shall lose all this. I shall lose the Wolsey I am. It is worse than death. He suddenly roared and sprang up into a standing position. Never. I will fall in this war if this is the victory that we aim to achieve. Bernice took him in her arms. You're loved, Wolves. In your other form. I take care of you. You feel that emotion, I'm certain. After a moment, his stiff muscles relaxed in her embrace. I cannot do it, he said. I cannot go back to that. Bernice looked around the others. They all seemed deeply shaken. Did you all see? She asked. Did you all experience what you once were? Candy had got to her feet, not quite able to look at anybody. I did, she confirmed. Then she looked up suddenly and winked. I may not have a lot upstairs, but I've got a bit more than I thought I had downstairs. They had all resumed their usual body language. The rules of pantomime had swept back into the room and changed them again. What do you mean? Asked the vizier, grinning maniacally as ever. What you once were? What are you talking about? Bernice patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, you didn't go through it, because you're just a simple computer program. with a single goal in mind: to take part in a story about the lamp. Either you would have taken it from me and put it here, or I, as either Aladdin or the princess, would have beaten you and ended up here, happily ever after. My spouse and I would also presumably have put the lamp there, so our friendly genie could attend to us." "And then?" asked Wolsey, obviously still shaken. "I think the phrase is, game over. But there's been a major change to the script." She started to laugh at the irony of it all. "Through some extraordinary circumstances, we've managed to do something with the lamp that this world didn't expect us to do. We've managed to give it to an alien invader with the head of a squid." There was a sudden shout outside, and then an impact. Bernice and the others were blown off their feet. They were just struggling upright as a messenger ran into the room. "The army with the genie, they are upon us." "Already?" yelled the king. "They're magic, they can do what they like." Bernice was hauled to her feet by the dwarves. "Now, I have to think." "Thinking," cried Prince Charming, "is a luxury for which we have no time. Only force of arms can—" With a hiss of impatience, Wolsey grabbed the prince by the collar and threw him out of the door. "Bernice," he said, "tell us what we must do." Bernice looked at the expectant faces around her and considered the options left to her. While she was doing that, she became aware that, in the corner, the pantomime horse was doing a little dance to attract her attention. She raised a finger. "Excuse me." "You're trying to tell me something again, aren't you?" Bernice said to the horse, having hustled it out into the corridor. "Rather than go through several more rounds of charades, couldn't you just take your head off for a second and tell me?" The horse stamped its hoofs several times, as if in protest. "You're still afraid that the pantomime will overwhelm you. But why? It hasn't managed to take me over." The horse reared up, as if chastising her for something obvious. "It's a long message. Not something you can just shout out like you did at the caves." The horse nodded. Bernice thought for a moment. "If I do something completely unpanto, will that upset the conditions enough for you to be yourselves for a bit?" The horse nodded again. So Bernice ran back into the king's chambers, grabbed the vizier, pulled him out into the corridor, spun him round twice, and gave him the most passionate of all possible kisses. "Eeh!" he cried when she released him. "I'll have you know, I've never been so molested in my life." He glanced a wry glance in the direction of the wall, and then slapped himself, remembering. "Sorry, I don't half miss having the audience there." "So do we all," murmured Bernice, watching as the horse split open once more. She gently pushed the vizier back into the room. "We," began the man at the front. "From God mission, I know," Bernice hurried him. "It's your catchphrase. Go on from there." The man took a deep breath. "You have, in your previous travels, encountered a very advanced species from outside the Milky Way galaxy, a species known as the People." The People? Bernice was surprised to hear them referred to in these circumstances. It took her a while to get her mental bearings. The People were humanoids, basically, who lived in a Dyson sphere. The material of their entire solar system formed into a globe which entirely encircled their sun. The People, being as far up the evolutionary ladder from humans as humans were from cacti, had abandoned all hierarchical government and lived an idyllic existence, their only form of organization being interest groups, which were sort of like clubs devoted to a particular hobby. The fact that a couple of the more bloody-minded of these groups had fought an interstellar war on behalf of the People and won it gave some indication of the level of technology involved. Apart from being liberated from absolutes concerning their gender, race, shape, and sentience, the People also lived in tandem with the drones, sentient robots who enjoyed working with them, some of whom liked being houses. Bernice had spent a few days on the Dyson sphere once, making her one of only a handful of humans who were even aware of the people's existence. That time had passed in a blur of intoxication and intrigue. The best sort of adventure, that, where you could stop at any point for home-baked bread and a casual snog. She'd always wanted to go back. The people were looked after by a vast, omnipotent central computer that they called God. She pinched the top of her nose in amazement at her own stupidity. You were being absolutely literal. You are on a mission from God. And he says to say hi, the man said. We're not of the people ourselves. We're both human beings. One of a choice few who have been picked to represent the people, or rather the tiny but interesting interest group, in the Milky Way. Bernice frowned. But the people are forbidden to interfere in the Milky Way. The greater powers of the universe agreed that, strategically, the people, the man interrupted her, aren't here. We are. Which is within the letter of the law, the second man chimed in, if not the spirit. Tiny but interesting are a group devoted to collecting information concerning trivia, the first man said. Mostly trivia about the Milky Way. They need more agents, and you're particularly well placed to deal with some of the things they're interested in. Della lies in the same sector as several things with which TBIIG are very concerned. The second man chimed in. God's been awfully cagey about what precisely he's so interested in, but then you know God. The smart money's on some ancient... But this is idle banter, the first man cut in, giving his equine partner a stern look. We were sent to make you an offer. The job would involve occasional missions across space, some unusual travel. Basically, we'd like you to poke around interesting places every now and then. We'd pay you well for your services. Bernice folded her arms. So, why all this panto business? The men shrugged. Nothing to do with us, said the second one. We just came to visit you on your ship when it was hit by that missile. Changed the place a bit. Changed the place? You mean this whole world is created out of quantum particle fluctuations, or magic, if you're primitive enough to want to call it that. As we tried to tell you, we've all been moved up a couple of dimensions, but geographically, we're all still on the Winton. And this is the important bit, if that ship doesn't get moving soon, the business of Panto will be the least of our worries, because we'll all be dead.